Welcome to episode 2 from the Chez Bee. These are the musings of what's been going on here at Chez Bee and the things I've been thinking about. This week, I've been thinking about televised crafts competitions with the start of the Great British Sewing Bee. Things like the Great British Bake Off have gained popularity in recent years, and the biggest benefit to such shows has been to promote crafters mainstream. Back in 2010, when the first episode of the Great British Bake Off was shown, who would have thought that fast forward 12 years and just under 7 million people in the UK would sit down regularly and watch a TV programme about baking? Sister shows such as the Great British Sewing Bee and All That Glitters regularly attract around 5 and 2.3 million views regularly. Let's put those figures into context. 15% of the adult population in the UK regularly watches the Great British Bake Off, and at its height, nearly a quarter of the population were watching it. 10% of the UK adult population regularly watches the Great British Sewing Bee. Yeah, that's 1 in 10 adults in the UK regularly sits down to watch a programme on sewing clothes. Research by Brother Sewing Machine found that 1 in 5 Britons, that's actually 21%, took up sewing and embroidery during the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. But the real surprise was that more men aged between 25 and 34 were bitten by the sewing bug compared to women of the same age group, which was only 21%. The survey also showed that almost half of the women aged 63 or over who responded said that they took up the hobby during lockdown. Whilst lockdown had many harsh downsides, for many crafts it's been a lifeline. The Heritage Craft Association recently published their Red List of Endangered Crafts. This list looks at all crafts in the UK and their viability and long-term prognosis. This time, they've also looked at the cultural context surrounding the craft's future. A good example of this is Shetland knitting, and as the Red List says, some crafts may employ the same basic skills but be separated by their cultural context. They might be a broad uptake across the country, but also have culturally significant manifestations that are specific to a particular geographic, ethnic, or religious community of practice. This has been especially problematic when a craft has enough practitioners nationwide to be classed as viable, but a particular culturally significant version of it is on the verge of extinction. One example of this is Shetland lace knitting, in which a great many people around the country have participated thanks to the many published pattern books and websites on the subject. At the same time, there is a particular community of practice within Shetland producing lace and an unbroken lineage of skill passed from one maker to the next, using the traditional double-pointed wires and leather knitting belt. It's within this cultural context that the craft is dwindling. As a result of this, two hitherto unspecified aspects, the inclusion of Shetland lace knitting in the previous edition of the Red List, was quite naturally the matter of much debate and disagreement. So, as a girl who played cricket during my school years, I'm saddened by the fact that the cricket ball making is now extinct in the UK. But truth be told, I haven't bought a cricket ball in over 38 years, so I might take my small part of the blame. Many of the endangered crafts are not ones that you or I could take up. I just don't have the money and facilities to make scissors. But we as crafters and artisans can support those that do produce these crafts by buying from the makers that we encounter them, or searching them out to choose to purchase from them. Why buy a plastic trug if you can invest in a traditional Sussex trug for your gardening when you can afford it? Canal art and boat painting has moved up from critically endangered to endangered this year. That means it's dropped one category. This is in part due to canal life being taken up by many people who are moving out from the housing crisis to a more sustainable way of living. There are now more than 35,000 people with boat licenses for rivers and canals, with the Canal and River Trust estimating that more than 15,000 live permanently on the canals and waterways. At the height of the working canal in the late 19th century, there was only around 8,000 living on narrow boats. With so many more people living on the waterways, this in turn fueled the interest in traditional art of the canals. I'm very proud to know someone who's taken this up. Kay from Canal Crafty Arts from the NBP Green got into canal art when she bought a narrowboat and started to restore the paint and artwork on it. She sells her work and offers talks on the history of the craft. If you want to support heritage crafts, then a great place to start would be the Makers Directory. and I've put links to all of the people I'm talking about in the notes for this particular podcast. So let's get back to the visibility of crafts on TV and in the news. Just as we enjoy watching a master chef create food that we could never attempt, watching highly talented people create masterpieces of craft is always a pleasure. We understand the difference between our abilities and theirs. The downside of this is that when these programs are recruiting new participants and your friends and family try to pressurize you to apply, we've all had the conversation with someone, be a family member, friend, or someone at work. You show something you've just made because you're rightfully proud of it. They then tell you that you should be selling that. Not everything's got to be monetarized. And you say that you don't want to. They tell you how much money you could be making. You then ask them how much they'd be willing to pay for it. They give you a price less than what it's for sale on in the local supermarket. You then tell them how much time it took you and how much materials cost, and they say, well, you're way overpricing it, or asking too much, or you'll buy that for less than that. Leaving aside the cost of your man hours, I normally make my Christmas presents for my siblings. I do this because at our age they don't really need anything that's, well, anything really. And anything special they're interested in, they probably found it online and bought it for themselves before I even started to think about it. So, at the beginning of the year, I think about what I want to make, and around September I start to make the presents. Okay, I buy the stuff in September, then panic create for the last 2 weeks before Christmas each year. But who's judging? This is part of my happy process. I have Christmas movies on, a cup of hot chocolate while I create something personal. But I do this once a year. In my last podcast, I talked about the benefits of creating for mental health. The pressure to produce something in a restricted timescale is a big part of these competitions. For many of us, that's just something we're not prepared to put ourselves through. It's one thing saying to a friend, wow, that's so great what you made. You could definitely be on the Great British Sewing Bee. Showing your appreciation to the standard of their work and rating it. It's another thing to keep on at someone who's declared they don't want to do it, that they must. It is a form of bullying. Just because someone looks happy and posts all their makes on social media doesn't mean that they're coping with the world. They may have crippling depression and are unable to even consider leaving the house. The last thing they posted could have taken them 2 hours to make, but it took them 20 because of disability. Don't get me wrong. If you decide that you want to enter one of these programs, then I'm going to be supporting you with every fibre of my being. But please don't pressurise me to go on. I remember sitting down to wind 80 pairs of bobbins once. I took them everywhere with me and wound a few at a time. People would say, can't you get a machine to do that? Well, yes, I have a number of bobbin winders at home. But for me, the act of pricking out my lace pattern, winding the bobbins, setting up the pillow, is as much as a part of making the lace as moving the bobbins themselves. I've seen speed knitting competitions on YouTube, and they're fun to watch, but I don't want to knit that fast all the time. I want to savour the art of making. In many of the crafts that I make and follow, there are traditions of entering your creations into competitions. I love seeing the posts on social media from friends in the US and Australia who've entered their quilts, their knitting, or lace into the county fairs and received ribbons. But this only reminds me of the time I took part in a model soldier painting competition. I was the only entrant, and I came second. Why? Because I was marked to a standard, and that's where my painting was at that time. I knew this when I entered, but how disheartening is it for people who feel happy with their work to be judged as falling short of the standards? Okay, you can say that's part of the risk you run when you take part in a competition. But for me, I want people to be encouraged to take up crafts and not to be disheartened because they were judged short. Being judged for your work is something you should go into with your eyes wide open. One of the elements of the Great British Sewing Bee that makes it such an uplifting experience is watching the main presenter. When you watch a competitor start to break down under pressure, the presenter, be it Claudia Winkleman, Joe Lycett or Sarah Pascoe, they step in and act like your favourite auntie or friend. They remind the contestant of just how great their other pieces were and get them to talk through what they want to do and what they need to do in order to move forward. We've all held our breath on episodes of The Great British Bake Off where one contestant had a catastrophic accident at the last minute and sighed with relief when the other contestants start to help them get over that finishing line. Even hubby remarked that he loved the way, when faced with a disastrous piece of baking, Mary Berry would always find something positive to say about the monstrosity she was faced with. I don't think it's a coincidence that this supporting of other contestants seemed to have come about more over the last few years since we faced lockdown. I feel as though we are more understanding and compassionate about other struggles in the craft and arts that we love. I also feel that one of the shows that demonstrates the camaraderie of crafting the best is Kirsty's Handmade Christmas. Watching the makers create their task while they chat and ask each other about what they are making reminds me of why we need people to craft with. During lockdown, a new Facebook group for lace making showed up. From being a place for people to share their lace making problems with fortnightly Zoom meetings, Beginning Bobbing Lace Makers has grown to over 8,000 members worldwide. I joined because with over 30 years of making and teaching lace, I wanted to be there to help and encourage new lace makers, and it's grown into a wonderful support group. It can be a challenge to find a group that you can physically join, especially if you work full-time, as many of the groups meet during the day. But the simple solution is to go to Facebook or Nextdoor and put a message out for the local group asking, is there a group near you? If there isn't one, do what I did in our previous town, start one. We met in a local pub on a Wednesday. I checked with the pub first, and they were really pleased to have a regular group coming in on a dead night who bought at least one drink each. When I recently moved, I immediately looked for a craft group to join. I have great e-friends on social media, but discovered that meeting with others and seeing what they make inspires me. I spent last Friday with a group of friends admiring their knitted dinosaurs and crocheted animals. I've got to give a shout out to Pterodactyl the dinosaur, who I'm totally in love with. Yes, sometimes I will want to make the things that have just been shown, but the real reason is being surrounded by the people who love to create makes me feel just so much better. So, that's the end of the thoughts for this week, and I'm going to put some links in the notes so that you can go find out more about the pieces that I've talked about and the places I suggested you read. Have a fab week. Speak to you soon.